Thank you. Thank you very much. So, travel and street, how I'm approach this and how we do approach it in the book I wrote here on travel and street is really about you guys, because I'm very similar in a lot of ways. I travel with my family to get out to get shots. Probably the biggest difference is that I'm usually taking images for books or for our studio. But I have to maximize my time, much like many of you, just on family trips in a lot of cases, just the reality of it. And then there are those rare occasions where I can take trips of my own that happen. But it doesn't happen very often. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of the planning that goes on and the things that I think about before we take a trip. And I'm lucky because I have Stacy, my partner, who is the logistics wizard, who really handles all the details. So I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. We have a studio there where we do training and the rest. And I've authored 6 books, 2 DVDs, and we do a lot of local workshops there in Chicago and then destination workshops. And like I said, this whole presentation is really going to be talking about travel and street. And a lot of people say, why travel and street? And the reason for that is because when we're traveling, I'm often taking street shots too. So we really didn't want to do a separation of just street photography or travel. And when you look through my style, a lot of it's probably even kind of a documentary style as well, I would say. And what I tell people about travel photography is it's usually universally appealing for a lot of people, I think, because it has a sense of a location. You think about going there yourselves. Street photography is something that some people either like or they don't like at all, and that's fine. So there'll be some images here that you may like or not, and that's fine. And I think it's when you're looking at these images, when they have an effect, and you got to say, what are they? Is it a travel, street? Just get a sense of what emotion it provokes. Now, this particular shot I took as kind of a classic travel shot. I didn't want a shot just the Eiffel Tower. We've all seen them. I wanted some action, so I saw these kids skateboarding. Actually, those were longboards, I think, not as skateboarders. I don't know, but they were making all these tricks, and I just kind of waited and framed up the shot and spent about 20 minutes there for that. And a question I get a lot when I'm out shooting is how often you wait for a shot. And I don't overstay any location for the most part. I'll spend no more than a half hour usually on a particular location and move on, because by about that time, really about 5-10 minutes, people are aware that you're there and they know you're taking photos, and you kind of lose that candid feel. So I don't usually stay in one spot for very long. You'll notice down below we have the metadata, and you're going to find, not in this shot, but in a lot of shots, I shoot with a 35 millimeter. That's kind of my lens of choice. I'm not going to tell you 35 is better than a 50. It's just what I shoot with. I will tell you, if I had to go out with one lens and one lens only starting out, I'd go out with a 24-70. You can cover a lot with a 24-70 for a travel lens. It was my favorite lens for a long time. And then I think as I got a little more honed with my skill set, I wanted to go prime, so I went to a fixed lens. Before moving on with that, one of the things I did, and a lot of people ask me, well, how'd you know to go to 35? One of the things you can do in Lightroom, if you're a Lightroom user, is you can take your entire collection, go to photographs, go up in the metadata, and sort it by your focal length. And if you're looking to get in a prime lens, see where you guys take most of your shots. It'll give you a good indication of where you find that you hang out the most. In my case, I came in around 33 millimeters, so I went with a 35. So it's a good technique to use to really get an idea what focal length, if you want to go to a prime lens, is beneficial. And of course, with a prime lens, we get the speed and we can shoot in low light settings. We spend a lot of time planning shots or planning locations. As I said, I'm blessed with Stacy, who's a logistics wizard. We kind of talk about what kind of shots we want. I go through and I create the shot list. So I'll start with, these are the shots I know I want to get. And a shot list may seem trivial, but it's not. You need to spend time creating that so you know where you need to be for the best light at that particular time. And sometimes it works out that way, sometimes it does not. But generally speaking, I like to plan our trip a little bit. Not so much that we can't do other things, but enough that we're in the general vicinity at the right time. And then, of course, we think about what equipment are we going to take. You know, it's a big part of this. Like when I came to New York, we came with a very small kit. When I go to Death Valley, I take almost everything in the kitchen, it feels like, you know, because I drive out there, so I have all this room. So it really depends upon how we're traveling and all the rest. But creating that shot list will really help you drive what equipment you're going to take. And then, of course, creating the goals. What is the goal of the trip? Is it spend a lot of family time? Is it a photography trip? Is it a mix? And kind of working them together. So my kit is basically the camera that if I have to go to a camera and I know I'm going to get the shot with, it's the one on the right, top right. It's Canon 5D Mark III. If you're telling me, John, you got to go out and get the shot today, that's the camera I know the best. And when I tell people, you go out with the equipment that you shoot the best. I know it's bigger than maybe a micro 4/3 or something like that, or using a mirrorless, but it's what I know I can shoot with. And so when people talk a lot of times about, oh, I want to be really indiscreet, I want to use a small kit, I understand that, and that's great, as long as you're proficient with it. If you're not, you're wasting time, because if you're going to fuddle around with it while you're trying to get shots, you're going to lose the shot. So I have no problems with smaller kits, but be good with whatever you're using. Lately, a lot, I'll take out a mirrorless. It's actually a Leica system, an M9, that's what I use, with a 35. That's what I brought here for straight up street photography. And that's the kit that I'll have. And obviously, you can see the difference in size between, that's a very small mirrorless kit versus the full-size Canon body. But size turns into a factor in how much you want to carry. I don't use my iPhone a lot. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not fast enough with it. I can't do composition the way I like with it. I need to really be looking through something. A lot of people, my daughter's a great example. She does a great job. It's done. She's moving on. I'm just not that quick with it, so I don't use it. This is a pretty big kit. And these are kind of the typical lenses I take. This is something we would take if we were going to go shoot in Death Valley, for instance. And the lens that I always hate to take, but I need it for compression, is the 7200. It weighs a ton, but I use it a lot in Zabriskie Point, places like that. And then I take filters with me. I still use filters a lot on camera. I still believe in using filters, especially if you have to take one filter with you for landscapes when you're traveling. You take a neutral density filter, graduate neutral density filters, and one filter I'll tell you need, and probably a polarizer. So probably two. Those two you really should have, especially if you're going to do some landscape stuff. But basically a pretty straightforward kit, 35-21 for wide angle, 50 if I'm going to do a little portrait work, 16 to 35 if I'm not quite sure where I need to be, and then the 7200. And this kit's about that big, weighs more. So the big thing we talk about when we're traveling and why we create the shots is I want to create opportunity. We arrived on Friday. We don't do this for the workshop, but for me personally, when we travel, we clock a lot of miles. I like to walk a lot. And in a given day, when we're traveling, I do probably anywhere from, I would say, 8 to 12 miles, just walking. Not when we do our workshops. We lose people if we did. They're just normally 3 to 5, but you still walk a lot. I'm not a person to sit down, and it keeps my creative juices flowing. In this particular case, we were in Florence, and I saw this gentleman with the dog and this arrow, and I liked the motion. The dog was looking one way, and this gentleman in the top left-hand corner was kind of looking the other way. There was a bus stop over there. So I had a 35. I came up there, and it was just one of 2 frames. And I knew in processing, and we talked about this earlier in the black and white series, that when you're creating that frame, you kind of need to know what you can do in processing to some degree. I knew I'd be able to burn this in a little bit, make this darker, and add a little contrast to the foreground. I like that to bring the arrow out. I mean, I saw the arrow, it was there, but I wanted to bring it out a little bit more. And then just what I like about this are the gestures or the position. So it's a photo that spoke to me, and that's why I took it. But it was intentional. It wasn't just a snapshot where they were taking it. I worked my way to it. This is a shot you're probably familiar with here in New York. When we were coming to New York for a couple of years ago in Grand Central, we really spent time looking at images. I've seen a lot of images of it. A lot of people do the flag, and they do like a slow or a long exposure with people moving around, and we did that. But I want something just a little different. And there's walkways there, and we've seen photos where people walk in front of the windows and whatnot. But I hadn't seen a lot with the clock, built into it. And I'm sure they're out there, but I just hadn't seen them. So that was the frame that I came up with. So some of these I think about ahead of time, just kind of knowing. And the best way to do that is by using Google search for images, not the web. You go to Google, click on the images, and doing searches there. Flickr's still a viable group. 500 pixels is a viable group. Google Plus, friends and family, they've been there. Just look at their images, get a sense of the space and the scale so you know what you need to take there. And also know the rules. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but they don't allow tripods without permit there. A lot of bus stations don't allow tripods without permits. But knowing those things ahead of time so you don't bring too much gear as well, that's going to slow you down. And then when we travel, wherever we travel, I try to add a little local flavor. And this is the Fade d'Eau stage at the Jazz Festival. And they wear these hats, ornate hats with flowers on them, and their shoes will have flowers. It's just something they always do. It's part of the festival. And then they dance to the Zydeco music, I think is what it is. And it's really kind of cool. And so I wanted to frame up the shot where it was very intentional, where we had the flowers, we had the jazz guy in the back left hand slightly out of focus in the stage. So adding a little flavor, someone that's somewhat familiar with the region would be able to put those pieces together and know where we're at. You have an idea we're at a music festival to some degree. And maybe if you think about it enough, you're at the Jazz Festival. Everyone probably can just, from looking at this image, if they haven't been there already, know this is Venice. This is a classic shot. It's a shot, and I'm not one of these people that's like, well, how did I get the shot so different than everybody else's? This is a shot, sometimes you have that reason, you have that shot because it is a classic shot. They hang out their laundry everywhere. And anyway, I like this shot. What I liked about this shot, and the reason I took this shot, was the shadows I was casting on the back. I shot this with color, converted to black and white, and I just like the shadows that was creating the contrast. And the texture as well. I'm a big fan of texture in my images, of the brick and whatnot. When it rains, you find other places to shoot. Sometimes I like to shoot in the rain, but it happens, and we had weather. And so we had to go inside, and I'm not a big one to shoot in markets on a regular basis. I shoot a lot of things, but not everything speaks to me. I'm usually eating food, not shooting it. But this was interesting. I've never seen so many olives. I don't even actually like olives, but Stacy does, and I took this shot because I thought it was kind of an interesting thing, and it has local flavor to it, literally. So spend some time, find those locations. Just because it rains doesn't mean you go to the hotel. Doesn't mean that you do something else. What I personally like to do most of the time is find a spot tucked away and watch people moving around in the rain, taking photos of them with their umbrellas, stuff like that. But like I said, sometimes you're on trips with family, you gotta make the best of it, right? They're not gonna sit out there in the rain with you, and you're not there to split up. So you meet in the middle, and you do what you do. There are lots of monuments, things that we go to, that there's a bazillion people. There's no good way to get the shot. The timing that you're there just isn't working out. This case, I was at Buckingham Palace many years ago, and it was, I think, the middle of the afternoon, horrible sun. And I put a Lee 10-stop filter. I thought, well, let's try this. And it has a very unique look. It's something I hadn't seen done there at the time. And as you know, or don't know, what happens is the people that are staying in still for that long exposure that took place, this is 90 seconds, they're in the frame. For the people that are moving in and out, they're out, and those, it depends on how long. And of course, it creates this kind of interesting look with the clouds. So that's something I'll do at a lot of locations where there's just a lot of people, and this was swamped with people. I mean, it was as thick as this room is all over. Luckily, they were moving. This is a Shark Fin Cove, California. We were doing the nice little drive there. Loved it, went down there. And I actually shot this with my daughter. I said, let's go climb down and let's get this shot. And we took a Lee 10-stop once again. This is a use of a 10-stop filter, create a kind of different look. I've seen this shot a lot, usually from above because people don't climb down. But I hadn't seen a lot with long exposure at that particular time. And so once again, kind of a different perspective. And then I converted to black and white because it spoke to me in black and white. I like long exposures converted to black and white. It's something I'd say it's very popular right now if you look at a lot of images with long exposures. Now, for those of you who don't know, a 10-stop, I should go back for a second. 10-stop is pitch black. It's hard to see through it. It's very difficult. So you have to do all your focusing ahead of time. You You have to figure out the calculation. If you're a math genius, which I am not, you can figure it out and figure out the exposure. I have an app. There's an app for that. I have it. And I work the app, tells how many stops based on the length of the proper exposure, and you put the filter on. Another thing I like to look for is just kind of juxtaposition, things that are funny to me. Anything that makes me smile, I shoot. Anything at all. And in this case, we had this billboard, if you will, or I should say painting this guy, I call it, that's the name of this photo. And these kids are loud as hell, screaming down there. And they're in front of a church. It was just everything pulled together. Really was an interesting photo to me, and it spoke to me, so I took it. And it was a quick shot. Like I said, I didn't hang around. Framing things a little differently. It's not always convenient. And sometimes even with a 15 millimeter, I didn't have enough lens. This was in Bruges. And I shot this in color. This was with a Canon with a Zeiss 15. And I was backed up in a corner. Most people shoot this shot over from the bridge. And this gets a lot of traffic, actually, so I had to wait. This is probably the longest I've had to wait for a shot in a long time. But I was on the ground. I mean, literally on the ground. Some people will do a trick where they grab their camera, they just take their camera and put it down, they can angle it. That is fine, and if you have an LCD that you can flip out and you can see, that works really well. I did not. So I had to get on the ground to see it. I really need to see my composition when I do things. And it was a waiting game until people came through. What happened, and I took advantage of this, is the sky ended up being a little lighter. The highlights were a little bit. So I decided to go with more of an ethereal theme and aid to that. So I took the whites in the processing and actually made them a little lighter to kind of give that feel to it, kind of a softer feel. But this would be an example of me. I saw this, framed it a little differently. I love using archways whenever I can. It's pretty traditional, but I had to wait for it. And I like looking for areas that are action, motion, things that I can do. And once again, we're talking about intentional. Whatever we want to do, it's intentional. Sometimes people capture motion, it's not intentional. In this case, I had this gentleman who just had this very distinguished look. He was, I think, people watching, getting ready to go into this little place in Venice. And I tucked away into a corner and was watching him for a little bit, thinking about it. And then turned my camera to shutter speed priority. Put it at a 15th of a second, centered on him, and waited for movement to come through and shot it to get the motion blur. And I got that 15th of a second. I can shoot pretty steady, actually, but I was leaning against the wall, which helps steady yourself. Anytime when you're going to shoot and you want to show motion, if you can somehow, some way, without a tripod, if you don't have one available, get a nice, firm base. So once again, very intentional shot. This shot, I look for really, I love clouds, obviously. A lot of my images have clouds in them. It's an active sky. And when I see an active sky and a really blue sky as well, my brain automatically goes to black and white. A lot of people go color and it's fine. This image in color is fine. But for me, it was just more dynamic in black and white. And one of the things I like to do, and I knew this when I took that shot, is I exposed it a little bit on the darker side, because one of the things that happens when you're shooting really bright like this is it's going to want to make it brighter. So I actually underexposed it a little bit. And then using the radio filter, if you guys missed this, people know that's my favorite filter in Lightroom. I darkened the clouds a little bit just using clarity. Clarity works with the midtones a lot. So I was able to really make those clouds pop. I mean, they were already very dynamic, but I wanted to make them a little more so. And I get this question, why black and white? And like I said, all I can say is what clouds and a blue sky, to me, I like going black and white. I see so many color photos that it's when I see a black and white one, I really like it. Gondola ride. How many people have taken a gondola ride? Probably quite a few. It's not, I thought it was going to be romantic. It's really not. They sit there, they're talking back and forth, and they're on their cell phones nowadays. It's not romantic. So instead, I was thinking about how am I going to get a different shot that I haven't seen. And so for me, it was about him and just kind of shooting through the back, if you will, and it had this cushy red. It was just super cheesy, but it was fun, and so it was just about really just kind of coming up with a different perspective of shooting the gondolier. Now this took a little bit of planning, and this is actually a HDR image, a single HDR. It's a tone mapped image. And this was a situation where we were in London, and the London Eye, it's a last ride of the London Eye at night. Worked out perfect for timing. I wanted to get a nice shot. And so we were the last ones that went on, and this was a shot I got through plexiglass. And it did take there was more manipulation than I normally do with my photography with this image, but it was also an HDR, so anytime I do an HDR, which isn't very often, it's being manipulated anyways. So, but it was one of those shots where ahead of time we were thinking about where can we get a good shot of, London, the water, all of that, and the London Eye's perfect. So booking and thinking in advance, it paid off. So someone asked me earlier, when do you shoot color? Well, almost all my shots in India are color. Can't tell you why, other than I think that the colors are so rich and the light is so diffused in many cases that it's beautiful and it's gritty. Probably because it's gritty, and I love grit. And this is on the Ganges, and I think this is Varanasi, and this boat right here, I loved everything about it. And so when you find color that speaks to you in street photography or travel photography, and you'll notice we have the yellow of the boat, and we have a lot of yellows, and the red. And so it kind of just pulled everything together in the frame. So it was a good use of color as well. And it was an interesting boat. So a lot of people don't like the rain. They're like, oh, I don't want to get my camera gear. Whenever we do workshops in Chicago, it's like, if it's raining, we're not going out, are we? We go, no, we go out. Unless it's thunderstorms, then we don't go out. So bring something. Because the opportunities that you get are phenomenal. So when we're traveling, even though oftentimes family members, if I'm on a family trip, they're like, oh, I hope we have great weather. I'm like, no, I hope we have kind of mix. Because it's new opportunities, you know what I mean? It's a different opportunity. And this is in Belgium, and anytime it's rained in the evening, I'm the first one out of bed. And we're shooting in the morning before there's a lot of people. And I've shot this church, I don't know how many times. I've been to Belgium like 4 times. But this was a great opportunity to get it with the cobblestones and the reflection and the rest. And one of the tricks, so when you're shooting a reflection, you want to generally use a higher f-stop, like f16 or something like that. f11 or higher is what we recommend, so you get a nice sharp image. Or in this case, f5.7, I can't believe that's right. Use something higher. And then so I've never been, we've been coming to New York, I don't know how many years. This was probably my 8th time here. And I've never been to Coney Island, ever. So I went out there this last time, and I loved it. And it's just interesting. And there was nobody there. And I came across this lifeguard station. I'm sure it's been photographed 1,000 times. And I really liked it. I was shooting, but I saw this person moving. And when you're doing street photography or any travel photography, it's really never about what's right in front of you. That's obvious. It's what's coming at you that you really have to pay attention to. I'm always looking for what's coming, and I saw this motion, and so I took that shot, but I waited, and this lady came in with a 3-wheeler, getting her exercise, and kind of framed it up and shot her, and then as she went away, shot her again, and you can see she's the only one out there. And to me, it was just kind of the story of Coney Island, this desolate place, but here's this one lady out there getting her exercise, and it just kind of tells a story. So don't just take one shot, especially when you're trying to work a theme. Take several shots of it and really stick with it. So not all shots are perfect, right? But it's what you got. And in this case, technically, this isn't a perfect shot. His feet are cut off. He's got the stick coming out of his head. But all I saw and all I cared about was the dog and this huge guy, big guy, right? And getting the shot and getting the hell out, right? I just wanted to get the shot, get out. And he didn't see me. And he's a big dude, but he has a fanny pack, so maybe I could take him. I don't know. So I sat there and I shot him, and I just moved on. It was one shot, And then, of course, I get in a pose like, oh, I missed his foot. But this goes to the point of street earning. It's fast. It happens really quick. So it's whatever you get, you got to run with. okay? And to me, getting that shot is a lot better than saying it wasn't perfect, okay? Street photography, in my personal opinion, even travel for the most part, doesn't need to be perfect. This is another shot that spoke to me. We have 3 dogs, and I don't know how many times I have felt like the dogs pull me one way and Stacy's pulling me in the other, right? Just torn between them, and that's kind of what this kind of spoke to me. And it was just kind of funny. And the fact that we had this really nice backdrop there in Venice, I really like that shot, and just the gestures and the dog and everything. So anytime where I have these things that are pulling apart, I really like. Now the next slide coming up hopefully won't be offensive, and it's a true story. There's no photoshopping. But the other thing I always say is you have to have your camera out. Your camera is no good in your purse. It's no good in your bag. It's got to be out. So going to the point once again, you have to have a camera that's out, so you need to take the camera that you're going to shoot with. And the next part of it is you really have to have the camera that you know how to shoot the best, okay? And then don't forget the little things. Now, I'm not a big person for taking photos of little flowers or the chocolate on my pillow. I'm not that guy. Stacy is, she loves it, she's very good at it. So I often forget it from the slides, but the truth is you need to build it into your portfolio if you're there. It's the little things. This is, of course, in Paris. I can't remember the name of the bridge, but they have all the locks on it. And just taking note of those things and really nailing down the details is a critical part. And then there's always a social commentary of what's going on, and it doesn't mean that it's usually, for me at least, it's about documenting the uglier side of wherever I'm at. It's that part, that voice that, when we're in our communities, we see it all the time, but it's just kind of noise. But as a traveler visiting, we don't see it all the time. I'm from a small town in Michigan, and if you would spray paint anything, you'd be in jail. You'd just be in jail. It'd be over. In this particular case, what I was drawn to this image was, of course, MAD. I'm not sure if the acronym is exactly how we think of it as the spelling MAD, or what it meant. It was in Belgium. But also was the human element in it as well. Whether he was homeless or not, I don't know. But he was just pulling it all together for me. And I like graffiti. I like shooting graffiti, and this was a good use of it. And then I don't shoot a lot of homeless people unless it's telling a story, or if I was doing a documentary on homeless, then I would obviously shoot them. I don't do a lot of it. How I look at it is if that person, whether they're homeless or if it's you or me doing something that's just unusual, then I'll take a photo of it. But I don't judge people for doing it either. It's really whatever your moral compass is, whatever you want to do. The only thing I recommend is not taking advantage of the situation. The biggest thing, too, that I see is giving them respect. You definitely have to pay attention to their personal space. I'll see people that are laying on the bench, and they come from a small town like I'm from, and we live in Chicago now, and homeless are, they're everywhere, but I'll see people that come on workshops, and they'll want to get right in their face and take shots, and we're like, that's not how you do it. And so just something in mind. This is after Mitt Romney. He was out of a job. Sorry, political joke. Finding the light, the hard afternoon, it's tough sometimes. It can be very harsh. I have this image in color. It's a nice color shot, but I like it a lot better in black and white. And the lines and the fact that we have a component with the people there. This was shot, I believe, in Venice. So when the light is really harsh, and it's brutal there in some spots, I like to tuck away where there's nice shadows and things I can look for to really take advantage of. And often, mid-afternoon sun, as I think I mentioned before, I'll go black and white. It's usually kind of an automatic. This is in Harlem. We don't play a lot of handball in northern Michigan, where I'm from. I don't even see it in Chicago that often. It's very popular here in some neighborhoods, apparently. And this was a very intentional shot. The light was horrible. And I really wanted to see that they were behind this big fence, if you will. And so I took advantage and almost silhouetted them for the most part. And that's how I process them. This is pretty much right out of camera shot like that. So don't be afraid of the midday sun. I mean, it is what it is. And get out there and shoot, because you only have so much time on location in a lot of cases. Now, if you're at home or whatever and you're going to New York City or Chicago, I mean, you can plan around the weather or you can plan around the time of day, but when you're traveling, you just don't have that luxury. I still use filters a lot. As I mentioned before, if you had to take two at least, it would be a polarizer and it'd be a graduated neutral density filter. I prefer, you can use the screw-ons. I actually prefer like the Lee system. Works pretty well, and or because you can put the adapters on your lenses and use them. It's nice, but I still use a filter. I'm a big fan of using a graduated neutral density filter, which I use in this case to darken the sky so I could get the proper exposure of the foreground. Well, the dirty trick is with any, I tell Stacy, I hate getting up early. I'm more of a night owl. It's how my brain's wired, so it takes a lot, but we get up early for shots that you just can't get. And so when we're in Venice, this is Florence, we had our very nice time the night before, but I said I gotta get up early. So this was starting at 3 a.m. in the morning. I did a lot of early morning shots, set up with this with a tripod. This is a moped, that's why we had the one light. And got this shot and was kind of working my way to the shot that I actually wanted. So I'll wake up very early, start doing some street photography and work to where I'm actually trying to get to, which was this shot. I want to get on the bridge and shoot the reflections. And we've had this conversation before. Do you leave jet trails in, take them out, stuff like that? I'm finding more and more with my photography, I leave stuff in. I don't take as much out. I don't know if I'm becoming more of a purist on the fact. This is an HDR image, so it's, in my opinion, already been manipulated quite a bit, because it's a single tone HDR. But I like the jet trail. I like what it adds to the image, so I left it in. And then, staying out late is critical. And, I haven't been to the Louvre in a while. I think it's fenced in some aspects now, but this is something, we were there, I checked it out earlier, kind of checked the area. Anytime I can get on site, we were at the Louvre looking, I kind of scout the area and then decide when is the best time to come back. And this was a situation where I had that opportunity to kind of scout ahead of time and determine, when should we come back to shoot. And it was obvious it wasn't going to happen during midday. There were just too many people. And I wasn't quite sure as well if tripods were allowed. So it wasn't clear to me, so we set up for nighttime, had no one bother us whatsoever. And you can tell I took advantage of kind of the shapes here, and X marks the spot. This is a pretty traditional shot from Venice. What's a little different with this one is I used a 3-stop on this at night because I want to get some motion. And the gondoliers pretty much sat there, but there's some motion in their faces. They moved around a little bit, but I was okay with that. But once again, this is all about staying up late. Photographer, especially when you're traveling, if you want to get a different perspective or want to get something a little different, it's never quick. And anytime you're doing long exposure, you automatically have added a bunch of time onto your whole trip because it's just, you never get it right straight off the bat. So, I mean, this took an hour to get the final shot I wanted, unfortunately. The other reality is places like this that are very popular. This is the Bean in Chicago. It's incredibly popular, and it's got a lot of tourists. The only time you're going to get that without people is going to be winter and late at night or early morning, and that's this case here. I think this is right around 11 o'clock at night, 10:30, 11. It was 15 degrees, and occasionally I still saw a person moving in and out of the frame. So what I did is I put a 3-stop neutral density on this as well to get a nice long exposure to protect myself against people moving in and out of the frame. So now we're going to talk a little bit about engaging or observing people in street photography. It's a big question. When do you go to talk to someone, ask for their photo? When do you just observe them from a distance? And it really depends on where you're at and what you're trying to get. We were talking about a little earlier, some people will use they'll use like a 7200. I call them snipers. They'll plant themselves down, they'll snipe. I guess I'm more of a hand-to-hand guy, so I always have the 35. I have to get up close usually. So when I go for a portrait, it requires me pretty much to ask for permission. At least I do. That's how I work it. But for a shot like this, it's all about the shadow. He was making this goofy move to get a selfie at the 9/11 memorial, which in itself, the selfies there are kind of odd. So, I wanted to get a shot of that. So it would have changed the whole photo if I would have asked permission. You guys may have seen this guy. He's been photographed by some locals here. He's also been in Humans of New York. Yes, this is kind of a funny story for me, because prior to that happened, I took his photo maybe 3 years ago, I think, and I got a baseball cap on. I've got a flannel shirt on. I look like a Midwestern guy, right? And Stacy actually spotted him. I missed him somehow. And she said, look at the interesting guy. And he's very interesting. He's got a very interesting look to him. And so I literally ran him down. And so he's got this guy chasing him down for the most part. And he moves quick. He moves very quick. He's only about this tall, but he moves quick. And this flannel shirt, baseball cap, I look like a tourist. I am a tourist, right? And I looked at him and I said, do you mind if I take your photograph? And he goes, why? I said, because you look really interesting. He does. He looks great. Very sweet guy. But we're at a stop, and I only had a couple seconds. I wasn't going to overstay my welcome. So I took it. It's not perfectly framed. It's not the exact shot I want, but I have the shot of him. And that was with a 35. So I had to engage to get that shot. And that's kind of a classic example of when that would happen. Another quick example is I was out shooting in the park. I always like the park because it's interesting. There was a lady there, and I had film. And I don't know if it came out yet. I won't know until I get it developed. But I just wasn't going to get the shot without talking to her. And so she was actually feeding the bird. She had a very unique look to her, very sweet. And so we talked about the birds for a while. She was feeding the cardinal. I go, that's a cardinal. And I'm a small town boy. I'm kind of a country boy, so I know my birds. And we're talking for a while. And next thing I go, you mind if I take your photograph? You have a great look to you. She goes, let me put my sunglasses on. I said, perfect. So it was wonderful. So you have to engage on occasion. Then there's times you can't engage. This lady, I'm not sure what was going on, if it was hot, or if she's worried the pigeons were going to poop on her. I'm not sure. But she had this newspaper over. It was kind of funny. She didn't see me. I was from a distance. And I got this shot because I thought it was funny. I thought it was interesting. I'm not teasing her. I'm not making fun of her. It's just an interesting shot. I don't see people doing it on a regular basis. This is a very interesting shot, and this is probably one of my favorites in my collection because it took the most for me to get it. I'm not used to photographing women dressed like that, for one, and this is not a posed shot. We were in Paris. I saw this lady at a distance, and it was in the afternoon, and the French like to nap. That's a joke, but, and so we saw her there, and we were walking down, and she was moving a little bit. She was just napping. And so I sat there, and I got as close probably from here to the wall, and I took her shot. And I took a couple shots, and then I moved on. But I felt very, very awkward at the time because I'm just not used to shooting. And I'm the furthest thing from a pervert, but that's the one thing you have to avoid as a street photographer, especially a male, is that perception. But it was interesting, and I knew when I took this shot, it was going to convert beautifully to black and white. The skin tone, everything. But then after I got past her, my moral compass kicked in. It's like, John, you got the shot, but is she okay? It was like, is she okay? And so we stopped, and sure enough, she adjusted herself, and she was just napping. It's the most awkward position, but I really liked the shot. But it's because it challenged me. And some of the shots that you're going to like are those that really challenge you. Other people may not like them as much, but anything that pushes me outside my boundary a little bit, I like. I like that adrenaline rush from it, as long as I'm not breaking laws or getting in trouble. This lady was awesome. She is awesome, and we chatted for a little while about her dog. I have 3 dogs, so it's we find common ground, and we chatted for a little while, and so we talked a little bit about what kind of dog it was, and then I go, do you mind if I take your photo? And she goes, why? I go, well, look at you, you guys are great. And she said, absolutely, and you can see her smile. She was really happy, and we got the shot. But the key when I'm taking these shots, it's 1 or 2 frames and we're off. We're not sitting there, we're not popping flash, but you have to engage. This is Arturo, and this was in Coney Island, and it was funny. We just started chatting, and he is the kind of guy you would not have been able to say, can I get your photograph? He would have told you no. There's just no way. He was just he had a confidence and everything about him that just told you don't bother me. But we were talking about the community. We were staying at a friend's place in Harlem, so we talked about Harlem a little bit. And 30 minutes later, I finally said, you might have to take your photograph. You have a very interesting look to you. I love everything he's put together, all of it. He said, sure. And that's how I got that shot. So you have to make an investment in a lot of cases. And it was an investment. I learned a lot about the culture and all the rest. Now, this gentleman I was drawn to because he has a cool look to him, and this is in Belgium. And this is actually shot, with film. And he just had this really interesting look. He's smoking a cigarette, he's got the dog, he's got the suit, just everything pulled together, slick hair. And when you look at this, you're like, he's a good-looking guy. Seems like a really, like a nice, amiable guy, easy to get along with. So what I tell people when they're taking photographs of people, is you try to get that shot, those candid shots first, so you get the true personality, and then you try to get the portrait. So I always try to, at a distance, get the photographs first of the person, just to get their personality, to get a real feel for their personality, because anytime you take a portrait, the personality sometimes changes. They just change. But this was more so who he was. This kid was talking, he was rolling a cigarette, and they wanted to pet the dog, and he basically said, get out of here. He was kind of gruff, kind of a gruff individual. This is probably a better depiction of his personality, is my guess, than the other shot. So I always like combining, getting both sides of the coin, if you will. But if you interact first, you lose out on this. So that's why you try to get the shots at a distance first, and then move in. So part of street photography and travel and the rest is you're going to get busted, right? You're going to be photographing people. Some people aren't going to like it. You have a right to be there in many cases, especially if you're in a public, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I respect that and I understand that. If someone tells me no, it's no. I don't pursue it. But in this particular case, I was watching them because he had his wife, and I think it would be his mother or her mother. It was just the way that they looked as they were holding hands going down this cobble street, and I liked it. And so I smiled, and they moved on, but I stuck with the shot, and I got it from behind, and I liked it from behind just as much and even more so than front. So just because you get busted, as long as you're not breaking the law, as I mentioned, and as long as you're not outside your moral compass, you don't run. You don't have to run. Just stick with it. But you don't go running them down, Unless he's an Asian guy and he's got really spiky hair, and no. If he would have told me no, I would have said fine. So we're going to talk a little bit about the legalities of street photography, and I'm going to tell you that I'm not a lawyer, farthest thing from a lawyer, and there's probably a lot of debate on some of these things, and there's a lot of gray. We wouldn't have lawyers if there wasn't gray. And a lot of people break the rules as well. But I'll tell you my understanding of it, our research, and then the exceptions. So the legalities are when you're in a public space, park, things of that nature, streets, transportation, unless otherwise noted, buildings that can be in places from public view, children, police, all that in public spaces, you can photograph them all day long. There's nothing wrong with that. How they react to that's a different story. Whether or not you should is a different story. And I'll talk about children for a second. I'm not comfortable shooting children. First of all, it doesn't do much shooting kids. Like I have a daughter, I have enough photos, and that's really the only kid I really care to get photos of. But on occasion I shoot kids, and that's pretty much a couple slides back is a good example of it. But rarely do I take close-up shots. But my experience has been, when we have our workshops, and we're going around Chicago, that there's a lot of people who want to shoot kids, and I understand that. I will tell you, females have a much better chance, and they do a great job at it. Men, and there's a lot of guys that they like kids, they have grandkids, they like the looks, the expressions, but it's difficult because you have to avoid that creepy guy thing, and I understand that because I've had people try to shoot photographs of my kid, and we're in a public park, they have every right, but it makes me a little anxious, so I get it. So generally, if I'm going to go shoot portraits of children in particular, I'm almost always ask, unless they're in parades, unless they're at, like for instance, we have the Crown Fountains where they play in the fountains, part of a bigger group. But if I'm coming up close to get the shot, I'm having the conversation with the parent. I'm not just taking it because it's a kid and there's no one to ask. I talk to the parent. But basically, and this is in the United States, in a lot of countries, this does hold true, a lot of European countries in particular, but in public spaces, you're safe. What you can't do is you can't go to extreme measures to get photographs. You know, I can't go climb a tree with a zoom lens in a park to go photograph in someone's window. You know what I mean? Because they have some perceived privacy, right? There's some privacy that they've been guaranteed. If I'm in a store, a mall, and the mall kind of always falls in this gray area, but if they have posted no photography, it's no photography. Crime scenes, long as you're behind, and you're fine. You know, or the police tell you, you can't somehow become part of the whole crime, if you will, taking photographs in the way. But if they have it taped off and you're behind those places, you're fine. Defamation libel. So we're talking about printing something, whether it be on your website, whether it be in magazines or something of that nature. You want to be careful that, first of all, what you're telling is true, the story is true. If the person's recognizable, which is really the key factor beyond being true. Like, for instance, in this case, the reason we use this is, let's say I were to do a blog about alcoholism in Belgium, right? And these two youth in the background were closer and we can make out their face. And I'm drawing this parallel that, they drank that, what is that, a fifth, I'm not sure, of booze. I'm drawing this parallel that isn't necessarily accurate. And then we print it. Well, I could be held liable for that. So you want to make sure that you're very careful about how you frame things up and the story you're telling. And model and property releases come up a lot with travel, and it's going to vary on a lot of different levels. But for the most part, really the factor that boils down to is commercial use. So if I were to take a photo, I have a cowboy that I shot. He was drinking a Dr. Pepper, and this is in Montana, and he was drinking this Dr. Pepper, and I can take that photograph of him. I can sell that photograph all day long. I can sell that photograph to magazines all day long for editorial purposes. I can print that image. I can print that image, and I can sell that image. I can put it on my blog. What I can't do is say to Dr. Pepper, hey, would you like to use this photo of this gentleman drinking one of your sodas, this cowboy, and using your commercials? Because I don't have a release for it. So it's commercial purposes, used for advertising or to further the business. Also the same with buildings. So when you take photographs of buildings, I take a photograph, let's say, of the John Hancock, for instance, and then I'm trying to sell that for advertising purposes. You can't do that. But if I'm going to make prints of it and sell it, use it for creative purposes, that's fine. And you'll find any ad agency or any stock company that you're uploading to are going to ask you for those things ahead of time anyways. And then, of course, there's property property would be the buildings, but dogs, even animals, believe it or not. If the dog is identifiable, it's your dog, and you go and you sell it to Coca-Cola or something like that, I don't know what, to Imes, and you didn't pay me for it, didn't get a release of my property for it, that would be a problem. And I'm sure a lawyer would do fine. So those are sort of situations. But when you're in the field, the reality is it's hard to get model releases, and it really breaks up what's taking place. So much of what I shoot is for personal work or it's used for editorial purposes, which in the United States is very liberal. It's a very liberal application of that. But I don't do any commercial work where I'm selling my stuff for commercial purposes. And that's kind of what we talked about here. So once again, photos for your personal use, social media, books, blogs, websites, prints, skylines, all those things, long as they're not promoting business. So these are the books that I've written, and we have the street book here available, and there's only a few. But if you want, you can get these online as well. And these are the 2 DVDs I've done, and talks a little bit about the processing, especially if you're interested in black and white. And these are the workshops that we do, a little bit about us and the workshops. We only do a few. We only do 6 people at a time. This is about as big as ever, the largest group I ever talked to. This right here. I just don't do big groups. Did we do okay? Are you sure? Okay. I need good grades. Thank you.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.